Have you ever just met someone or heard someone that was a great speaker that caused you to be inspired? Suck up. Don't start with me. No, you ain't getting no gift cards for this. Not happened. Have you ever heard someone speak, maybe at school, maybe at church, maybe somewhere that really inspired you, and you listen to them and you're like, wow, like I love listening to them. You know what I'm talking about? Have you ever heard someone speak and you did not like listening to them? Like you had that one teacher and they began to talk and you're like, you know what I'm saying? Like you begin to fall asleep in class because you're like, listen, I think that's the worst. When you fall asleep in class and you're at that point where you're about to fall asleep and your head jars and like scares you awake, you know what I'm saying? So sometimes we listen to speakers and we listen to communicators that we absolutely love listening to, that inspire us. Then we listen to some communicators that, not so much, that we don't like listening to them. They put us to sleep. They're boring. They're not inspiring in any way. But I want to show you 3 clips tonight from famous speeches that we might know of. The first one you might realize from history. The moment you hear it, you're going to know what it is.
77 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
Well, who knows what this is? The something proclamation, that was very close, but no, yes. Gettysburg Address. It was something that was so important. The Gettysburg Address, when we hear it, changed history. It was one of these things that Abraham Lincoln is absolutely known for. And so it was one of these things. Let's put the next one up if we can, the next one.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed.
Now, we just celebrated Martin Luther King Jr. Day a couple of weeks ago. He is one of the most inspirational and inspiring men to listen to. If you've never really listened to his whole speech, I want to encourage you to go on YouTube and actually listen to it, because it's one of these things that will inspire you. Now, we talked about Abraham Lincoln, we talked about Martin Luther King Jr., but your generation is probably more familiar with something like this.
I just wanted to say that I didn't know Thresh. I only spoke to him once. He could have killed me, but instead he showed me mercy. That's a debt I'll never be able to repay.
Who is this? What is this from? Hunger Games. So you're familiar with this. You're familiar with the movie. You're familiar with the speech because it moved you. Now, one of my favorite speeches that I don't have tonight is from a movie that is actually one of my favorite movies. How many of you heard of the movie called Braveheart? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Braveheart, Mel Gibson. He gives the whole like freedom speech and he gets them all pumped up to go and for the freedom. And so it's one of those things that's absolutely inspiring and is a lot of fun. And it's one of these things that happen. And so we're in a series right now talking about Nehemiah. And we talked about how Nehemiah was called to go back to the city of Jerusalem, that was his hometown, to rebuild the walls of the city. And we talked about the importance of that. If you guys remember a couple weeks ago, we talked about who he was and the fact that God connected him with the king, and he asked the king to go and do this, and the king said yes. He was a man of inspiration. He was a man of prayer. He was a man of fasting. And so he had this. Last week, we talked about having a burden. And do you guys remember I talked about the incident that just happened recently at school? I talked about what happened at Altoona and Hollidaysburg and the whole mess of everything that happened. But I talked about how you need to have this burden in your heart for your school. How it's got to be something where you need to have a burden that is on you to see your friends come to know Jesus, to see your teachers and your counselors and the principals, all of these people to come to know Jesus. You have to have a burden on your heart so that they can come to know. We talked about how you're going to have to take a risk. You're going to have to make a plan. and you're going to have to actually make the plan happen. And so I mentioned last week that sometimes when we have a burden, we cry and we moan that we have that burden. But then I also talked about how sometimes when we have a burden, it moves us to do something great and moves us into action. And so we're going to actually pick up here for a few moments, and we're going to talk about how Nehemiah encountered some different people when he began to tell them about what God had on his heart. Have you ever had really good news or something really awesome happened, and you went to share it with someone, and as you began to share it with them, they weren't as excited as you? You know what I'm talking about? Like, you were really excited. Like, maybe it's because you have pancakes and sausage and tater tots tomorrow, and you're like, yeah, we got pancakes and sausage and tater tots, and like, you're so fired up, and they're like, that's cool. You're like, are you serious right now? Like, when you're all hyped for something, and they're not hyped for it, you're like, I need new friends. I totally need new friends. You're not hyped for this. And they don't listen to you, and you're trying to inspire them, and they don't listen. But then you have those friends that you go up to, and they're just as hyped as you are that there's pancakes and sausage tomorrow. Like, they're just as hyped. They're just as ready. They're psyched up like you. You guys are getting psyched up for the pancakes and sausage, and you're so excited. And you have those friends that listen to you and those people that listen to what you're saying. And what happens here in Nehemiah chapter 3, we're going to find that Nehemiah is actually talking to people about some things that's going on, and he's trying to inspire them to rebuild the city with him. And check this out. This is crazy. So in verse 1 and 2, it says this: the high priest Eliashib and his fellow priests were all up at it. They went to work on the sheep gate and required it hung doors. Continuing as far as the Tower of the 100 and the Tower of Hanel, the men of Jericho worked alongside them, and next to them, Zaccur, son of Imeri. Now, what we got to see here is basically that verse just said with all those weird names that are in it. Basically, it's saying that these people were rebuilding the walls of the city. Kind of like if you've ever been to Pittsburgh, there's bridges to get into the city. Well, in these cities back in the day, there was actually walls that you had to go through, gates that you had to go through to get to the city. And each group of people had their own responsibility to repair part of the city. So if you lived on the north end, you had the north end. If you lived in the south, you had the south. If you lived near the sheep gate, you would take care of the sheep gate. If you lived near the camel gate, was actually a gate that was designed for people with camels. That was a camel gate. And then some people had not glamorous jobs. And we find, like in Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 14, they said the dung gate, referring to the poop gate, was rebuilt by Mecham, son of Rakam, the mayor of the district of Beth Hakram. He repaired it, hung its doors, and installed its bolts and bars. Now, in case you weren't aware, the dung gate was right where the city dump was. How many of you ever been to the Altoona dump? Like, you've been down there where the dump is and the smell and everything like that. You guys know what I'm saying? So down where the city dump was, this guy believed so much where the trash and the sewage and all the nasty stuff was and the smell and the gross. He even said, I will go down and repair that gate because I believe in what Nehemiah is saying. Now, in order for you to go down to the dump, the dung gate, you must really believe in what is happening. For you to say, listen, I'm going to go to the stinkiest, smelliest, dirtiest part of the city, and I'm going to go repair it. That's what I'm going to go do. And so they believed what Nehemiah was saying, that, listen, we need to repair the city because it's so important. Now, tonight we're going to talk about two groups of people. First group of people are people who listen. Because in life, you're going to have people who listen to what you say. Listen, there is really nothing more respectful of when you begin to talk to someone and they look at you in the eyes and they listen to what you say. So many times what we do nowadays, guys, we don't listen to learn, we listen to respond. So we're not listening to what's being said because we're already trying to think about how we're going to respond to what's being said. But there are people out there that listen, and they did the work. They understood, like, listen, Nehemiah wants to rebuild the city, so it's going to take some work. So we're going to have to do this. There's this project, and we got to get it done. Think about your school projects that you got to work with groups in. How many of you like to work in groups with people? Because you're like, yeah, they'll do all the work. Like, I'll just sit there like, yeah. How many of you do not like working in groups with people? Yeah, that's how I was. I did not like working in groups with people because it wasn't going to happen. Because I was always trying to give an answer, and they weren't listening to me. because maybe they felt like I had the wrong answer, but they weren't listening, and so I had a hard time working with them. So you guys know what it's like when you're working in a group and someone's not listening to you, and you're trying to explain to them, and then all of a sudden, like, your answer is the right answer, and then you give them this look. You guys know what I'm talking about. That look like, you're dumb, I'm smart, have a nice day. You know, like that's our reaction. Like, I was right, you were wrong, yeah, go away. That's how we kind of think about these things. And Nehemiah was talking to these people and stirring them up, and they actually listened. Now, how does this apply to you? Well, very simply, you're going to go to school and you're going to encounter your friends, you're going to encounter people that are there, and you're going to begin to tell them about Jesus or tell them about something about what God is doing in your life. And guess what? They're actually going to listen. Your friends are actually going to listen to what you have to say, because what you have to understand is that people are looking for something. It doesn't matter how young you are or how old you are, we are all looking for something that makes us matter. You know, our generation is very simple. We want to love and be loved. That's pretty much it. We want to love and to be loved. And that's is pretty much the making of who we are. And people out there are going to listen to what you have to say about Jesus. They are going to listen because you have something that they desire, they want, because you're not getting upset about the situation because you know God's in control. You know, things are crazy at home, but you know that God is there and God is working. So you don't have to worry about these things like, yeah, things are rough at home, mom is not there, maybe dad's not there, whatever it might be. But yet you're so secure in who you are, and they're like, man, I want to be like that. And you can sit down and tell them it's because of Jesus. It's because of Jesus. We love to talk to people who listen. Several months ago, I had an opportunity to connect with someone who you guys have met before. His name is Rob Z. And Rob Z was he was on the radio for many, many years. And Rob was someone who just loved seeing good influence, good things happen in our city. And he was someone that was so inspired to just see things that we actually connected through some relationships down at the Clay Cup with Sarah Vogel. She's like, hey, you got to get together with Rob. You guys would really click. And I had the opportunity one evening to go over to his house and just talk. And up to this point, we had not talked about God. We had not talked about Jesus. We talked about you guys. We talked about how we could help change the environment, help change the city, help change the culture of teenagers. And we began to talk about all these things. And all of a sudden, he brought up a question about God. He was just curious. He had been involved with a relationship with God somewhat when he was younger. He had been to church a couple of times, but he had just asked me, and he began to ask me a question after question after question. I was there for actually a couple of hours later than what I even planned on being there for, but everything that I said to him about Jesus, he listened to. He was so hungry to listen to it. And then his wife, Nini, she was so willing to sit down and just listen and ask questions and listen. And I was like, man, this is awesome that there are people out there that actually want to listen to the word of God. Now, because of that, Rob and his wife, God has really blessed them, and their opportunities are opening up. They're going to church down in Tyrone. Rob's growing in his faith. Nini's growing in his faith. And they have Max in Sunday school and church learning about God. And because they were willing to listen, God is doing something awesome in their life. And I believe that there are people out there in your schools that are just like that want to listen to the voice of God. I really believe that when you're living a life for Christ in your school and at your job, people pay attention to you. Do you know that people are paying attention to you without saying a word to you? People are like, oh, that's so-and-so. They go to Refuge. They go to that church thing. They're not telling you they're watching you, but they are watching you. They're not telling you that they're looking at you and examining your life and seeing how you react when someone's angry at you or when someone hates you or someone makes fun of you. They're not telling you that they're watching you, but they are watching you. People are watching to see how you respond when you say that you love Jesus. So people are listening, but we have to say something that's worth listening to. I'm going to say that again. So if people are listening to us, we better say something that's worth listening to. Whatever's coming out of our mouths and whatever we're saying, people are wanting to hear, but make it worth it. Let it be something that's not going to just change their day, but let it be something that's going to change their eternity. So if you say something about God, let it be something that's worth listening to. And that's what they did with Nehemiah. Nehemiah's people listened right away. Boom. They're like, yes, we will listen. We'll rebuild the city because we believe in what you're saying. And so Nehemiah inspired them to move. But let's talk about the second group of people. There are going to be people who will not listen. Who will not listen? Can I tell you one of the most aggravating things to me is when I got something that I'm talking to someone about, and I'm talking to them, and then all of a sudden I realize within 2 minutes or 3 minutes of having this conversation, they're not listening to a word I'm saying. Is that aggravating to you too? Like you're sitting there and you're talking to them, and you're like, oh yeah, they're listening, and then they're like, I'm sorry, what'd you say? And you're like, are you for real? Like, are you for real? I just sat here and talked to you about all this stuff, and you weren't listening to me. Now, maybe some of you, maybe that's you. I know sometimes like I get distracted and Bethany will have to zoom me back in because I can handle like seeing a lot of things that's going on and I can process when tons of things are going on. That's why like some of you when we go to youth convention or we go to camp, I'm listening to 5 different conversations and I know what's going on and someone else is talking to me and I'm talking to them, but I know what's going on behind me and beside me, above me, below. I know all these things that are happening, but sometimes Bethany just wants my undivided attention and know, hey, are you listening to me? But sometimes people are just not going to listen. See, that's one thing that we've done. Sometimes we have not listened. And I don't know about you, but one of the most common phrases in my house, my dad would say, are you listening to what I am saying? I say, what? Oh, he'd get fired up. Fired up. My mom would be like, did you hear what I just said? I said, huh? And then I'd run and hide for like 3 weeks. But we know that there are people in life that are going to listen to us. But you also got to understand that there are people out there that are not going to listen to you. And as I'm reading this, I'm going to talk a little bit more about these group of people because the moments that people don't listen to us, listen to me, because some of you have dreams, some of you have goals, some of you have things that you want to do with your life, some of you have things inside of you that God has called you to. But listen, sometimes when people are not willing to listen to us, what we begin to do is we begin to lose hope, we begin to fall apart, we begin to lose the vision, we begin to lose the calling, we lose the burden of what God has called us to because people won't listen to us. And let's just be real. It's hard when people aren't going to listen. You sit down with people and you begin to tell them and talk to them and they don't listen and they're not connecting with what you're saying. And you're repeating yourself and we're saying this and we're saying this and we're saying this. And you got to understand that people aren't going to listen to you. There are going to be people at school, as soon as you bring up Jesus, they're going to be like, nah, I don't want anything to do with Jesus. Earlier this afternoon, I was watching a telecast of a group called the Barna Group. It actually does a study with teenagers. And what they have found is that your generation is not technically called the millennial generation anymore. Your generation is actually called Generation Z, which every generation has a label, and that is anyone that was born after 1999 and forward till now. So that generation, they're calling you Generation Z. But what they are finding is that there is the largest percentage in Generation Z that don't care about God. They don't care about religion. They're not affiliated with anything. They don't believe in anything at all. They don't think that God is something that is relevant and that they need to be involved with. So guess what? There are going to be people out there that are not going to listen to you talk about God. And more importantly, when you're obedient to God, opposition is going to come. When you're obedient to what God has called you to, people are then going to come after you. So now they're not just not listening to you, but they're coming after you. Remember, God called Nehemiah, go back to the city, rebuild the wall, make it happen. He said, okay, check this out in Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 5. Next to him were the Techites, except for their nobles. They wouldn't work with their master, and they refused to get their hands dirty. They refused to get to work. This group of people said, oh, Nehemiah, that's cool. You rebuild the wall, but I'm not getting my hands dirty. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to get my hands dirty. I mean, right in the middle of all of this, of Jerusalem being rebuilt, there's this group of people that says, nah, we're not doing this. Bunch of lazy bums that will not do it, that are having no part of it, are saying, listen, we're not going to do this. We're not going to rebuild this because we don't want to get our hands dirty. We don't want to get dirty in doing this. But can I tell you, when God calls you to do something, sometimes it's going to get a little dirty because you got to put in the work. You got to put in the work and you got to make your dreams and what God has called you to and the burden happen. Now, you got to understand, they wouldn't serve God by rebuilding the city because they didn't want to be a part of it. But guess what? It didn't stop there. It didn't stop there. This is a longer verse. I don't have it on the screen. But in Nehemiah chapter 4, verses 1 through 3, they actually had a group of people that were there. It said they exploded in anger at what Nehemiah was doing. And they said, these are miserable people. And what they began to do is they said, you know what's going to happen? We're going to go and we're going to destroy the wall that they're trying to build. You remember as a kid when you're playing with your toys and maybe you're building with your Legos and you're building something with your Connects or anything like that, and you're building something pretty cool, and then like your little brother or your little sister come through and destroy the whole thing? You know what I'm talking about? Like when you're building something nice, maybe a sandcastle that we were talking about, and you spend all this time in a sandcastle, and all of a sudden, your little brother comes by and starts kicking the sandcastle, acting like Godzilla, destroying everything. This is exactly what happened in Jerusalem. This group of people said, you know what? This is what we're going to do. We're going to actually go against them, and we're going to try to tear it down, and we're going to try to keep them from working. We're going to distract them. Listen to me. Everybody look at me. There's going to be people in your life, when you tell them what God has spoken to your heart and you tell them the vision and the dream that God has told you to do, there are going to be people out there who won't listen to you, won't take part in what you're doing. But then there are going to be people that are going to try to distract you from doing what you need to do. Distract you from going after the call of God. Distract you from the burden that God laid on your heart. They're going to try to pull you away from all of that. But guess what? It gets even worse. You have people that ignore. You have people that try to distract. But then it says in Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 11, at this time the enemies were saying they won't know what hit them. Before they know it, we'll be at their throats and we'll kill them right and left. That will put a stop to all of the work. So now it's not just people ignoring and not being a part of. It's not people distracting. Now it's people that are going to try to come after Nehemiah and his men and kill them. And I was reading this and I'm thinking, man, now it's physical threat. Like in the midst of all of this controversy, in the midst of all of these things, like that's going to rattle you, man. If people are going to ignore your dream, people are going to try to keep you distracted. And then I said, you know what? No, we're just going to come and we're going to crush and destroy what God has laid on your heart. What God has promised you, we're going to take it away and we're just going to end it so that you can't have part of it. And I began to think about that and I'm thinking, man, what would I do if that happened to me? But see, this is not about me. This is what about Nehemiah said. Nehemiah was the man. This is what he said in verse 14. Don't be afraid. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome. And he fights for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Nehemiah is like, listen, I'm not getting distracted because they're threatening me. My God is bigger and my God is awesome. Nehemiah knew what God had called him to, and he said, listen, I will not be shaken by this. This is not going to keep me from building this and doing this. And we actually look through, because what Nehemiah said is this. He said, I'm not playing by your rules. I'm not playing by your rules. I'm not going to do everything that you say I should do. You want me just to give up? Well, guess what? I'm not going to play that game. Oh, you want me to distract me? Guess what? I'm not going to play that game. You want to try and kill me? Guess what? I'm not coming down off this wall till this wall's finished. If there's one thing your generation needs, it's to not get involved in that game. Listen to me. Do not get involved in that game. When people are trying to steal the promise from you, people are trying to distract the promise from you, people are trying to kill. No, don't even play that game. Keep going after the promise. Keep rebuilding the wall. Keep going after your generation. It doesn't matter what people around you are trying to do or say. If you don't entertain them, they won't have a platform. See, some of you let everyone entertain you in your life. You need to pull the curtain down and say, I'm no longer giving you the platform to entertain me and distract me and keep me from the dream that God has in my life. Why? Because it's a waste of time whenever the work is done. Stop. So in your life, when you face this opposition, what are some ways that you can refuse to come down off the wall? In other words, what are you going to do to keep focused on what God has given to you? We're talking about making an impact in your school, in your community, in your home. If you really want to make that impact, you're going to face opposition. You're going to have people that stand in the way. You're going to have people who don't listen to you. You're going to have people that mock you, that threaten you. You're going to have people that try to stop. So what is it that you're going to do? Because if you really have a burden and a promise from God about your life, are you going to just give up, or are you going to keep going and do what needs to be done? One of the verses that we're going to talk a little bit more about next week that I want to refer to is Nehemiah said this, okay, if you're going to continue to rebuild this wall, this is how you rebuild it. You rebuild it with a hammer in one hand to keep rebuilding the wall, and you rebuild it with a sword in the other hand to fight off the enemy. From that point forward, as Nehemiah began to construct the rest of Jerusalem and the walls, all of his workers would have a tool in one hand and a sword in the other. Listen, this is for your generation. This is for all of you. This is for your dreams. This is for your hopes. This is for your burdens that God has laid upon your heart. You are called to go and to do what God has called you to do with a hammer in the one hand, constantly building and constantly going after, to having the sword in the other hand to say, I'm not letting anybody take this from me. I'm not letting the enemy take this from me. We find out in Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 15, the wall was finished in 52 days. You got to understand that's not a small feat. To rebuild an entire city wall in just 52 days, we're talking miles of a wall that go around. We're talking gates. We're talking in the midst of people trying to distract you. We're talking in the midst of people trying to kill you, that they still got this done in 52 days. To the point where there are times where people were literally probably working on the wall and then trying to fight, and then working on the wall and then trying to fight people away. Regardless, they persevered and they finished and they did it. Why? Not because they were good, not because they were talented. It was because they had something on their heart from God that couldn't be stolen from them. See, some of you are talented and you have skills, and some of you are really good at certain things. But it's not always skill and talent that's going to take you where God wants you to be. It's going to be the burden on your heart that God uses to take you to where you need to be. It's not always about us being where we want to be. It's about being where God needs us to be. Again, God has called you to your school. Why? On purpose, for a purpose. God has called you to your job on purpose, for a purpose. So tonight, I want to encourage you tonight. Some nights we have heavy messages. Some nights we end in altar calls. But tonight is an encouragement to you. I want you to act on that feeling in your heart. To know that even though you might be afraid, it might be difficult at times, that God has you. God's got your back. It says that God is awesome and He's going to protect His sons and daughters, His mothers and fathers. For others, you might be still waiting on that burden saying, God, I don't know what you have for me. Keep asking Him. The Bible says that if you just ask of me, I will gladly tell you, and I won't resent you asking for it. As we dismiss and then kind of close up, I hope that you pray tonight for the burden that God will lay on your heart, and you act on it. And I hope that God will do something amazing in your life that will transform you. So across this room, let's bow our head and close our eyes for just a minute.